Yesterday, December 7th, 1941.
We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And if, which I do not for a moment believe,
wenn ja, dann tritt für mich ein, so wie ich für dich eingetreten bin.
A date which will live in infamy.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you.
Alright guys, today we have a very special video. This is the first episode of the series, World War II, 80 years later. Today I'm joined with Army veteran Charlie Bailey. Charlie was in the combat engineers from 1943 to 1945. He was born in 1922 and is currently 103 years old. And we are sitting here in the year 2025 interviewing him 80 years after the war. So this is a very special occasion here. So Charlie, if you could just start by talking about your childhood, what your life was like growing up, things like that.
Oh, I was, let's see, my dad died when I was 4.5. And when he was laid out in the barber shop. He was a barber. And they used to lift me up and look at him. I was 4.5 years old and he had diamond rings on. I said, I want the diamond rings. And nobody would take them off. And then they'd lift me up and, oh, get out here and go play. They'd come back and say, look, get down, I want the diamond rings. They wouldn't give them to me. They were 3 diamond rings on his finger. And I was raised in the Great Depression, and my mother had 8 children, and my youngest daughter wasn't born. And my youngest sister wasn't born yet. And she wasn't allowed to go to the funeral, and then he was buried in the Beavis Cemetery, where across from where the North Gate Mall is. Oh, okay. I remember when I started working when I was 16, and I worked in the farm, on the farm from 8 in the morning to 5 at night for $1 a day.
Nice.
The farmer used to hand me $1, and then I'd go home, I'd give it to my mother, and I'm talking about pitching hay, picking up potatoes, pulling weeds, hoeing, and I'd give the $1 to my mother, and she'd give me 10 cents. She had handed me a dime, and so I was working for a penny an hour.
Wow.
And then my mother got 90 cents, and she gave me 10 cents for working all day in the hot sun. And all I wore was a pair of shorts and a straw hat and shoes. That's all I had on. And one time we went in to eat, and it was hot summertime in July, August, and the farmer said, Charlie, he said, look at that thermometer, what does it say? I said, it says 106. And he said, you think we ought to take a break? I said, yeah, I think we should. He said, okay, we'll take a break. It was 106 in the shade. That was somewhere around 1938, 39.
Nice.
Did you go to school, or was people homeschooled, or they just worked back then? Did you do school, or
School,
did you go to school, or?
yeah, I went to Coleraine High School,
Okay.
Rain.
and I played all sports.
Nice.
I'm the only one out of 9 children that graduated from high school.
Nice.
I was the only one in my 9. My mother had 9 children. He had no job, didn't know how to make a water bill out,
Oh, wow.
she didn't know how. All she knew to do was, and she was from Hungary, and all she knew to do was sign her name. That's all she knew. And she could read the newspaper, but she couldn't write the newspaper. She could write it in German. And she came over here on Ellis Island,
Wow.
and she was 19 years old, I think, in 1905. And she lived to be 13 days of being 100 years old. My mother did.
Did she? Wow.
I remember me and Patty saw her last, and Patty rubbed her face, and she said, Mom's almost 100 years old, and she ain't got a wrinkle in her face. She said she's almost 100, and she didn't make it to 100. She had 13 days ago, and she had been 100.
Wow. So, what year was she born?
She was born in 1885, and she died in 1985.
That's amazing. So, when Pearl Harbor happened in 1941, where were you, and what was your?
I was a senior in high school, and I went to school on April 7th, 1941, and everybody said, "Oh, you have to go to the Army." I said, "Yes, so will everybody else. Why just me?" Well,
Yeah.
when you had a big family and you didn't have no father and you didn't have no money, why you wasn't included. Like something go on, like the seniors and junior ones, they would never invite me because they knew I didn't have no car, didn't have no money, and they treat you kind of bad. They didn't make fun of me, but I wasn't included in anything because they knew I didn't have no money. And because my dad died, I mean, that wasn't my fault, but they just sort of held it against you when I was a kid. When I was a senior in high school, I started driving. Well, and I was out about every night. And our biggest thing before I went to World War II was roller skating. That was the thing when I was about your age, going roller skating. That was really the thing to do roller skating.
Nice. So, what exactly motivated you to join the service, or why did you join?
I didn't join the service. I was drafted.
Oh.
I didn't join the service, and now I would, but then I wouldn't. No.
Yeah.
And I got a deferment for 1 year to watch my mother. And then I got a deferment for 1 year. And my 2 youngest sisters, then they had to take care of my mother, and they they were working, so he said, well, you have to go to the Army. So I went, my best buddy's right there. Bernie Sandfoss, and he was from Kentucky. He was a briar hopper. Bernie Sandfoss, he was from Dayton, Kentucky, and that's where we went in when they went in the service. It was we started in Dayton, Kentucky. Not Dayton, Kentucky. We lived over there for a while. Fort Thomas, Kentucky. That's what it was. That's where he lived, but he died. I think he was 96. I think 97. I don't know.
So, when you were in the war, you mentioned you were in the Battle of the Bulge. And
I started in the Battle of the Bulge, and I was right in the beginning. I was in Stavelot, and I didn't know that was the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge. I didn't know it, and nobody else did either.
Yeah.
Nobody knew that was the beginning when I was in Stavelot. And we pulled out of Stavelot, and then at 12 o'clock at night, and they ordered us back in Stavelot. And we heard that right over the hill in Malmedy, they were shooting. They had prisoners, and they lined them up in a ditch, and they backed the truck up, and they bombed the prisons. They were taking no prisoners. Everybody's being shot.
Wow.
When you said if you get company commander pulls on, if you get captured, you'll be shot. They ain't taking no prisoners.
Oh boy.
And then they had them Tiger tanks, and I was over across the bridge, and I was on guard duty, and I was standing there not talking, I was on guard, and somebody appeared in front of me. And what was his name, Patty? They said it was a saint.
Really?
Appeared in front of me. I said, where'd you come from? And he said, there's German Alamein. Alamein is these he said they're gonna drop grenades on you and kill you. And I said, no, there ain't no Germans here. So Officer Day come over and said, everybody over on the other side of the bridge, and there was 3 half tracks was going to go over the bridge, and I stopped them. I said, don't go over there, there's Germans over there. I said, no, there ain't no Germans. I said, yes, there is. I told the sergeant, I said, don't go over there, you're going to get shot. So, no, there ain't no German. He went over there, and 2 of the half tracks with soldiers in the back, about a dozen, they all got killed. And one half track got back, and I said, I told you, there's Germans over there, you didn't listen to me. And then they started shooting us with their guns. There was a 50 caliber machine gun on top of this half track. They were shooting at us, and the officer of the day said, everybody get down and protect the town. This is your infantry now. So we get down, and I looked around, I didn't see anybody, so I asked my buddy, I said, where'd you go? He said, oh, I took off. He said, I ain't gonna fight as infantry. And then I went up to a house, and the door was locked. I said, I wanna go up and see where the Germans are. And I was ready to shoot the lock off of the door. And then I thought, well, them people were upstairs hiding, they'll be scared to death. I said, I ain't gonna do it. And I didn't shoot my way. Well, it would have been easy to take M1 and shoot the box off. And I didn't do it. I said, well, I'll wait. And then I'm standing there watching for Germans, and all at once the sergeant yelled, everybody in the truck were leaving, the infantry's coming in. So I run over to the truck, got in the truck, and as we was going out of the hill, out of Stavalo, I laid on the bed of the truck, and they were shooting at us with their own guns while we was leaving. And then later I heard that the infantry knocked out 3 Tiger tanks after we left.
Well, the saint's name was Remical. Saint Remical. He's the patron saint of Stavalo.
You talked about Tiger tanks. They weighed 67 tons, and our tanks weighed around 35 tons. And they was, well, the General Patton. I mean, he was commander of 3rd Army Division, General Patton. And one time he made a speech when we was in Luxembourg, and his speech was so bad with cussing where all the civilians kept leaving, and I said, oh my gosh, he knows more cuss words than we do. Yeah, he was cussing up a storm, and all the civilians started walking away. Man, he got horrible demeanor of talking, and all you did when I was in there was cuss. We didn't do anything else. I mean, that's just what you did. That was your language.
Yeah.
The first sergeant said, you can't do that now, you're going back to civilian life. Yeah, you're telling us that, now you're telling us. Well, when I come home, I had post-traumatic stress disorder, and I would dream of being in the Army every night for about 40 years.
Wow.
And then one time I was standing on the bow of a ship, and we was gonna have a landing on the Omaha beach, another landing, and I said, I can't do this. I still remember standing on that ship, I was dreaming. And I said, I'm 90 years old, and I couldn't find the first sergeant. And I come downstairs and I sit on my chair in there, and I couldn't sleep, so it seemed so real. I thought I was still on the second landing at Omaha Beach.
Wow.
Yeah, I landed on Omaha Beach about 13 days after the first landing of June the 6th, 1944, or 43. And then I was reading a book here, one of these books here, the landing in Omaha Beach, and 100 of them went land on a beach. 90 didn't make it, and maybe 10 made it out of 100. And I think, boy, am I glad I wasn't in that first landing. But I didn't know that until I just read it a couple of months ago.
Nice.
That if there's 100 came in, 90 of them didn't make it, 10 of them made it. And then there was I was reading, I didn't know it then, there's a guy landed on the beach and he said, I ain't going. And the captain put a gun up to his head and he said, now you're either I'm gonna shoot you or you're going. You gonna go? He said, all right, I'll go. So he went, he said, I'm gonna shoot you. He said, I don't wanna go either. He said, well, you're gonna have to go too. He said, I don't wanna go, but this we have to do it. And then we cut off prisoners on the Cherbourg Peninsula, and they had 2 divisions of infantry were supposed to go over the hill which was made and fight the Germans, and the division soldier says, we ain't going. Let them sit there, and finally they run out of food and ammunition, and they gave up, and there was 80,000 prisoners. In the Cherbourg Peninsula, they couldn't go out to the land because we was there, and they couldn't go out the ocean because they didn't have no ships or anything. Germany didn't. And when they gave up, they were all stacked in a truck straight up like this on them 4x4s. 80,000 prisoners.
So, what did the typical day-to-day life look like in the war?
One day looked like another, and I went 3 days and 3 nights without sleep. Without sleep. I didn't have no sleep in 3 days and 3 nights. And I don't remember eating or drinking.
Wow. And
that was during the Battle of Bulge. And we built a bridge for Patton's tanks to go across the Line River. And we started at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we had the bridge built, a Treadway Ponton Bridge, in 8 hours, and it took 45-ton tanks around over the bridge. And I said, I want to drive the last pin in the bridge. They said, yeah, you can. And they had a pin in there. It was about that big round solid metal, about that long. And I drove that pin and I said, all right, bring the tanks over. Bridge is ready. And them tanks start rolling over that bridge. And that was all hooked together like this, like a rector set. And you could take it apart and put it someplace else. It was all, if you ever had a rector set, you know what a rector set is?
I don't know what that is
You
either.
make little things out of it that go like this, you take it apart and then put it back together again.
Okay.
They call it a rector
I'm young,
set.
I guess. I don't know.
Well, this was all hooked together by big pins. The bridge would go like this, and each one was hooked. And then it had boats all the way across the Line River.
Cool.
And it'd take tanks, and all the tanks were going across were going like this. Because everyone they went on, the tank was sinking, but the others helped the other tanks up. It was tied on this land, and they had, for each ponton, they had an anchor that you drop down and go to the bottom of the river. And then I remember they were throwing shells across. They were throwing shells, and I had a hold of one of these pontons, and I was holding with a rope, and I was up the Line River in my neck, and I was ready to turn it loose. It took 15 men to move that. And then Egan, my friend, he came out, and then everybody helped me keep the ponton from running down the Line River. And then that night, I didn't have time to build it. I said, can I sleep with you tonight? And the guy says, yeah. So we sat down and we crossed our legs at each other. And then in the morning we got up, and I said, somebody's gonna have to help us up or stiff as a board. So I held my hand up and they lifted me out. I slept all night on the bank of the Line River.
Wow. That's awesome.
And then tanks, the tanks were all lined up on the bridge waiting until we got the bridge built. And I said, bring the tanks over, bridge is ready. Then we built that was the fastest bridge at the length and the time in the world. We built the fastest bridge ever built. Yeah, Treadway Ponton. I got a picture of me in the other room. I took a picture of that.
Oh, wow.
Of that
see that.
bridge. I got it in the room there.
Okay.
Do you mind if we check that out? Should we check that out? I kind of do.
Get to it.
Oh, finishing this is there. Yeah.
I got it in a plastic container.
Yeah, we'll bring it. If you wouldn't mind showing it. Be cool.
Yeah, I took pictures all the time whenever I found the
That's awesome.
camera. And another guy had film. He said, I'll let you use the film if you give me a, and then I'd keep that under my shirt that he wasn't allowed to take pictures. And then after the war was over, the captain said, did you take pictures when you was up there? I said, yeah. He said, I did too.
That's what you did? That's cool.
That's the actual bridge right there. That's me and a buddy of mine up there.
Nice.
The one was a Bailey Bridge. That's my last name, Bailey. They call it a Bailey Bridge. We built a Bailey Bridge and a Treadway Ponton Bridge. At Bailey Bridge, now you...
9-hour job. The longest bridge in 9 hours. Guess what that said. They called it Bailey after you, or is it just called that?
No, that was a Treadway Ponton Bridge we built.
Okay.
I thought it was 8 hours. I was on the bridge all day.
Yeah, that's a long time. Wow. Do you mind if we show the camera, or do you just want to?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Dad, it's really cool.
That's pretty wild.
Look at that.
That's neat.
It's amazing.
And my kids got on their cell phone, that, what do you call it, that phone you got, and they found that bridge
Oh, yeah.
on the cell phone.
Oh,
I
they
said-
found it online?
They said, is that the bridge? I said, yeah, that's it.
Huh.
So, what was the most challenging aspect of the war, in your opinion?
I would say the Battle of the Bulge, because they were, we were in Stavilo when the Battle of the Bulge started, and we said, oh my gosh, there's shell in the hospital over the hill from us. I said, oh, this is getting terrible. There's shell in the hospital with patients in it. And then we heard that they were shooting prisoners. They were put them all in a valley, and they backed the truck up and put the tailgate down and started shooting them with a machine gun. Well, they assassinated. They would, and then some of them got away to tell the story. They were shooting us with machine gun, and some of them ran and got away, and they didn't catch them. One or two of them, I think, got away because they were just assassinating them.
Wow, yeah, that's great.
And I didn't know until I started reading these books. And I was right in the beginning of that Battle of the Bulge and didn't know it. And that's where I froze my fingers and my toes in the Battle of the Bulge. And I still can feel it today.
Wow.
My fingers were frozen, my toes were frozen.
Wow.
And I went to the medic, and he said, oh, you got frostbite. I said, no. I said, my toes are frozen, my fingers are toes. My fingers are frozen. He said, no, you got frostbite. I said, no, I ain't. And then when I was coming home, we was in a tent in France waiting to get on the ship. And I'm sitting there on my bunk. The bunk was all lined up, and here's a guy from either the 82nd or 101st parachute, and he took a carbine and put it in his mouth, and he shot himself. He committed suicide.
Oh, yeah.
And the sergeant, I called the medic. I said, medic. He came and he said, get that Jeep over there. We got to take him to the hospital. I said, no, the first sergeant, he raised his cane when he get his Jeep. And so finally he said, get the Jeep. I said, okay, I'll get it. And we took him to the medical hospital with just a big tent. And the doctor looked at him and wrapped his head up and walked away. And I said, ain't you gonna do nothing for him? He said, I can't do nothing. He did it to himself. And so I took the Jeep back, and I thought, oh, if I'd just seen him, I'd say, don't do that. Please don't do it. We were ready to come home. And he left a note, and he said the reason I shot myself because they wouldn't let me come home with my outfit that I went through the whole war with. And they did the same thing to me. I wanted to go home with the people like Furley. He was you had to have a partner when you were over there. You wasn't allowed to go any place by yourself. You had to have a backup, 1 or 2 or 3 at a time. You wasn't allowed to go by yourself.
Nice.
And a lot of things we did when I was over there, looked for these big churches. A lot of churches were standing, these big cathedrals. They were standing, we'd look them out and go in and visit them.
Pretty stuff over there in Europe.
And then they had, in Stavelo, during the Battle of Bulge, where there was a guy wanted to go to the priest. He wanted to go to confession. I didn't know what confession was, and I wasn't Catholic. And he said, I want to go to the okay. I said, they're shooting down there. I don't want to go down there. And so I said, oh, okay, I'll go down. Went down there. He went to confession. You know what confession is?
In the Catholic, yes.
Yeah, he went to confession, and the priest gave us a absolution, and they gave us a little, what was it, Joe?
It was a St. Christopher medal? Or he gave you a medal?
St. Christopher, no.
It wasn't St. Christopher, it was a medal.
It was a medal of the priest of
Okay.
a saint in that Stavelo.
St. Remical?
St. Remical. Yeah, he gave me
That
it,
was
and
the
I
saint
taped
that
it on
appeared
my
to you.
dog tags, and it's still on there. My youngest daughter's got it. It's still on my dog tags. And I could put my dog tags on now just like when I was in the war. And they had a real thin necklace on, and how that stayed all them years that I wore that, and it still stays there.
Wow.
And what it was made of, I don't know. And then I got a diary of every day I was over there in the war. I got a diary that I wrote every day.
Oh, wow.
And Alma's got that. I had little books about that big, and I'd write in there what happened that day. And I remember a lot of times, this is Sunday, which you'd never know it here, that it's Sunday. And how I knew it was Sunday, I don't know. I really don't know. But I went 1 month over there without taking my clothes off.
A month?
I went 1 month. Sometimes I'd take my shoes off, and most of the time you just lay down wherever it was. If you sleep, and someday you'd go 2 days. That was nothing. Going 2 days without any sleep.
Yeah.
And someday, during the Battle of Bulge, I didn't eat all day until from morning to night. And then I'd go to mess sergeant about 9 o'clock at night. You got anything to eat? He said, yeah, I'll find something. Found something. I didn't eat all day that first day of the Battle of Bulge. And then I don't remember eating when I was on that bridge for the whole day. I don't remember eating. I don't remember drinking water. All I remember is being on building that bridge. And then there would be a speedboat to bring them tracks out, and we'd hook them onto the end. And then he'd go back and get another one. And that night the Germans blew the bridge out, and then the engineers had come after us. They'd rebuild the bridge again. They blew that Treadway Patton bridge that you see right there. They blew the middle out, and then you had engineers that came behind us, and they rebuilt it. They rebuilt the bridge. And one time they were throwing shells in, and I lay down in between them treadways. They were about that tall. You just lay down, and then the shell go over top of you. And this officer, it was a second lieutenant, just come from the States, And he start running for the shore, and I'm laying there, I'm laughing up a storm. I'm laughing so bad. Look at the dummy. All I did was lay down them tracks, and then everything go over top of you. Nothing's gonna hit you. And they had them big tracks where the tanks was running on. I just lay down and I was laughing. I had the stomach ache, I laughed so hard. I said, look at the big dummy, he's running for the shore. Just lay down. You need to run for the shore. He never did come back. He was watching me build the bridge. He never came back. That's the last time I seen him. I said, I won't see him anymore.
Yeah. So you were in the 17th Armored Engineers?
I was in 202nd
202nd
Engineers, and the 2nd Armored Division was bringing the Frederick Pontons out for us to build, and we built the bridge. We built a bridge, and they brought the floats out to us to hook on the bridge. 17 Armored, and they belonged to Patton.
Okay, so they were Patton.
And they got the presidential citation, and we didn't, and we built the bridge.
Classic.
And we tried to get that presidential citation, never did get it. Never got it. They got it from the President Roosevelt. They got the president's citation.
Roosevelt's still in.
Building the longest bridge in the shortest time in the world. There was no bridge built that fast and take 45-ton tanks across. One day we built it.
How many guys worked on the bridge?
Some of them were loading the parts off the shore. Some was on the bridge. Some was bringing parts of the bridge out. I don't know, maybe 500 men all together.
Yeah.
I don't know. All I know, I was on the bridge the whole day. One of them's the Treasury Ponton Bridge, and one's the Bailey Bridge. Let me see that one, I'll tell you.
Sure.
I'll turn around all
I can't see it like that.
Right here?
Oh, that's the Treasury Ponton Bridge, that's the
bottom one.
Bailey Bridge.
Bailey style.
There.
202nd, that was you?
202nd, that was one I was in. 202nd Engineer Combat Battalion.
Nice.
Yeah, and I become a sergeant at the end of the war. I got a battlefield commission. I become a buck sergeant, and our first sergeant, he's become a captain, and our squad leader, he came in as second lieutenant. A battlefield commission. I got a battlefield commission from being in the war. And then one time the captain lined us all up, and he said, we're gonna quit working on the bridge. We was building the bridge. He said, the war's over, we ain't doing nothing more. He said, let the Germans build their own bridge. And we had a big weapons carrier full of booze and all kind of booze. We got drunk that night. I was the sergeant of the guard, and this one guy said, Charlie, I gotta have a drink. I said, I'll give you half a cup of booze in your canteen, and that's all I'm gonna give you. I said, you're on guard. I ain't gonna give you no more. And, we all got drunk. Oh, man.
Boy.
And then we had Polish prisoners,
Yep.
and that was helping us. And they kept building a bridge, and he said, Captain said, let them build a bridge to build. He said, we ain't gonna build it. Let the Germans build their own bridge.
Yeah.
And the captain we had in charge of our company, he was in the World War I also.
Was he?
And he was in World War II. And all the other companies said, I wish we had Captain Wolf. He was in World War I. He knows what's going on. I said, yeah, I'm glad he's here. He said, he's already been here. So he knew what was going on, Captain Wolf.
He saw some stuff.
And he was part Indian.
Was he?
And he was fair. And if you went out marching training, he was right there with you. All I'm doing now is giving you highlights of what happened.
Yeah.
And everything that happened, I wouldn't want anybody to actually undergo what I did as a young man. I mean, when I was 18, I got my first bicycle. When I was 18 years old, and I started driving when I was 19, and I drove a 1.5-ton truck hauling ice and coal before I went in service, and I hadn't never drove before. I said, "Can you drive?" Yeah, I couldn't even find the gears. And you had the double clutch. You probably don't know what that is.
I don't even know.
Double clutch?
You
Doesn't
push
sound
the clutch down, you put it in neutral,
Huh.
you leave up on the clutch, push it down again,
pretty
then
manual.
put it in gear. That's
Yeah.
double clutching.
Huh.
And I had a buddy of mine showed me how to do it, and before that I just grind the gears, and I didn't know where the gears were.
Wow. Yeah.
And he said, do you know how to drive? He said, "You got a driver's license?" I said, "No." He said, "Oh, we'll go get one this afternoon." I said, "Okay." He said, went in there, and the guy said, "Give him a driver's license." And it says on the top, driver's license, 25 cents. I still got that. 25 cents for a driver's license.
Yeah, wow.
Nice.
He just says, "Give him a driver's license." He gave me a driver's license. That was in 39. Yeah.
39.
"Give him a driver's license." He says, "Okay." I think it was $2.50, something like that. I really don't remember.
Nice.
But all I'm telling you is the highlights of ever went on. 3 years.
Yeah. It's a lot to cover.
There's a lot to go on, and when I was in, I was a person. When I come home, I was a different person. I wasn't the same person.
Yeah.
And the woman I volunteered at the hospital, I volunteered in the hospital for 40 years when I come home. And she said, "This man I've married," he said, "he was a real gentle person. He went in the service and he come back, he wasn't the same person." I said, "Well, no, he wasn't." I said, "I wasn't either. They make a different person out of you." So then we got in front of the officer before the war and we said, "We don't want to shoot anybody." He said, "If you don't shoot them, they're going to shoot you. Now, do you want to live or you want to die?" That's it. He said, you make your choice.
Yeah.
He said, "That's all I'm going to tell you. Do you want to live or you want to die?" He said, "If you don't shoot them, they're going to shoot you."
Yeah.
I said, "Okay." Yeah, we said we wasn't raised up to shoot each other, for crap's sake.
That's true.
And the language we used was unbelievable. Oh, gee.
Maybe that, yeah.
And the first sergeant says, "You can't use that now when you go home."
Yeah, that's true. Go home talking
And
like
my brother,
Like, what the
he was in there, he was in the Air Corps, and he still cussed like a trooper when he came home. Your grandma Bailey, my mother, she'd say, "Oh, he cussing like a trooper." Yeah, that was our language when we was in
You already
there.
answered
You were a different person when you're in, especially when you're in the. I was in the front lines for 10 straight months, and I'd get 1 day off of the lines, and you could sleep in the bed and live in a house like this for 1 day, then they'd send you back to fighting again. You get 1 day a month off. And I was on the front lines for 10 months. And I had post-traumatic stress disorder, and we called it a nervous breakdown then. We said, "Oh, I had a nervous breakdown."
Yeah.
And when we first got on the front line, we had boys your age, 18, and they were bawling like a baby. I said, what are you bawling about? They said, I don't want to be here. I said, we're here. I said, live with it. I said, where are you going? You gotta stay here.
That's true.
And they started shooting at us. And he said, oh, they're shooting at us. Yeah. I said, get in a foxhole or something, for crap's sake. Quit your crying. They cry like babies.
Nice.
Oh yeah, when that saint told me there's Germans over there, and I looked at him, now there ain't no Germans, so he started crying. This is a grown man. I said, whoa, gee, he's telling the truth, he's crying like a baby. And I said, oh, there's Germans here. And that's the beginning of the Bulge, and nobody knew it. They didn't know there were Germans there, and our officers, they didn't know it. And then them ones I told, don't go over there, there's Germans. Or, no, there ain't. I said, yes, there is. But he didn't listen to me. So that killed about 25 or 50 men. If he'd listened to me, well, they'd still be in the war. Where they had 2 more half-tracks to fight the Germans. But yeah, I'm reading that book, and I said, oh my gosh, they got that in them books that I'm reading, Stabilo. And I said, oh my gosh, that was start of the Battle of Bulge, and I didn't know it.
That's amazing. Wow.
I did. I know it now. A lot of things I read. And then I read in them books here that George Washington didn't have a college education. And Lincoln didn't have a college education.
Yeah. So
Lincoln was
they
an
did back
attorney,
then.
wasn't
Yeah,
he?
he just you just were admitted to the bar back then. You didn't need a degree for it. It's just the way it was in the 1800s. But yeah, that's awesome. You just answered our last question. So just anything else?
I was reading about the German people during the war, and the German people were starving also. Everything was going to the military. And then people said, was you ashamed when they dropped them atomic bombs? I said, no. They started the war. We didn't. We ended it, but they started it.
It's fair.
Yeah.
It's fair.
Yeah, I was a senior in high school when they dropped them bomb Pearl Harbor, and while they were bombing Pearl Harbor, the Japanese officials were in Washington talking peace, and they knew that they were bombing Pearl Harbor, and they're standing there talking to the president. And then he heard about it. He looked at him. He said, if I had a gun, he said, I would have shot him. They're talking peace, and they're bombing Pearl Harbor. Now, how could anybody do that? The officials were talking peace to President Roosevelt. And he said, if I had a M1, he said, I'd shot him. That's how mad he got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know that either. I just knew that when I read the books here. I didn't know that. Did you know it?
I didn't know that, no.
I didn't know they were
They
peace
were
talking
talking-
at the same time.
They were talking peace. The officials from Japanese was, Japan was. I said, well, you dirty dogs, you.
Yeah, they sure were.
One time we were sitting around talking, veterans was, and I was talking about hating the Japanese, and the guy stood up, he said, I was in the service, he said, and he said, I hated them now. He said, I hate them now.
They did. They always
I
hated
said, you
Japs.
shouldn't hate anybody. If you hate somebody, it's worse on you than it is on them, because they don't care. Don't
That's for
hate
sure.
anybody. That's a bad word, hating somebody.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
What was life like after the war? How were you treated when you came back home?
I will tell you that nobody shook my hand or thanked me for being over there.
Really?
No, I did have one guy did. Yeah, I went to the bar and he thanked me being there, and he put his hand out, And I didn't shake his hand because he had a civilian job. He didn't have to go. That upset me. I was making $68 a month and he was making $75 a week. And I didn't shake his hand. And he's the only one that I know of when I come home and said, thank you for fighting the war. Nobody else did. My sister didn't. Well, my brother was in there. My sister didn't thank me. My neighbors didn't thank me. Nobody did. And the guy I used to work with was an alcoholic. He was World War I veteran.
Was he?
And I didn't go down to see him, and that really hurt. I should have went down and see him, and I didn't. He treated me real good. He was World War I veteran. And I was wondering why I was an alcoholic. And when I went in World War II, I said, oh, now I know why I was an alcoholic. Now I know.
Yeah.
But I didn't know then.
For sure.
Yeah, John Fly. Yeah, he was a good man. He owned a store and I worked in the grocery store and I made, well, the woman would give me $1 and he'd give me $4 so I worked on a Saturday. He'd give me $4. Oh, here he said, I'll give you some more. I said, okay. And then he told me, he said, if you want candy or cake, go ahead and eat it. And then his wife says, don't eat no candy or cake. She said, we can't afford that. And then I listened to John, I listened to her. I was eating candy when she wasn't there while I was working.
Nice.
Yeah, well, I'm telling you, just a skim of what happened.
Yeah, it's a lot to cover, but it's an amazing story, even if it's just the highlights. So thank you so much. We're going to conclude that there. Thank you, Charlie. It was an honor to be here, everyone. Be sure to smash that like button because this is an amazing experience we got to experience today and you guys at home. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.